Hi, friends. Today is Friday, the first Friday after Ash Wednesday, as we look forward to beginning our Lenten season. Indeed, begun on Ash Wednesday, first Sunday of Lent. This weekend, I I would wanted today just to propose kind of a context uh, for Lent and Lenten uh, practice and Lenten spirit. At least this is where I find myself uh, this year at this Lent and these circumstances and this time and place. I was at a meeting here at Ascension last weekend, and people were reflecting on, their Lenten practice, the practices of prayer and fasting and giving alms. And someone asked me, what are you giving up for Lent? And I thought, ooh, I haven't really thought about that. I'm trying to give up, cynicism and sarcasm and fear and Reese's miniatures but I hadn't really. It occurred to me at that moment that I really hadn't given much thought at all to how what I want to hold during this Lent in terms of practice and spirituality. And so it did. I did, just through prayer and reflection and through my kind of taking stock of conversations with my spiritual director, and because last time on this conversation I had mentioned that I kind of in more recent weeks have been kind of looking back to my relationship with the Lord as I experienced it 30 years ago on my 30-day retreat, and that deep, that intimate kind of nearness I felt that I experienced with Jesus, that was really the fruit of that retreat, and how I reignite that. And certainly Lent is the time to kind of come back to that. But what I found coming to mind in my heart in all of that was this was kind of this mantra to be gentle, and meaning to be gentle with others, and if indeed I'm gentle with others, it demands that if there's any demand of gentleness, it's that I demand or that I'm gentle with myself, that I receive gentleness, that I receive the gentleness of the Lord with me, and then that kind of mixed in with a lot of attention I had been giving lately to the practice of compassion, and as we're kind of creating a culture of compassion here at Ascension Academy, and receiving our scholars and their families, and so that got me thinking about I could make a flow chart of all of this, of how I got here. But Father Greg Boyle, who's a Jesuit priest who many of you I know are familiar with, a Jesuit who's in Los Angeles, who founded Homeboy Industries as a way of kind of a therapeutic recovery for gang members. That Boyle had a slogan, something like, the quickest way to stop, the easiest way to stop a bullet is with a job. But as his ministry has evolved over the years, he talks now about the power of extravagant tenderness, and very specifically, that love is the answer, community is the context, and tenderness is the connective tissue. There's no question that the Christian enterprise, if you will, is about love, right? Love of God, love of neighbor. We do that in community, and how we nurture that in community is this relationship of tenderness that we have with each other. So I would propose that as I'm, and I just share with you that as I'm moving through Lent, what I want to both experience and receive, and what I want to give, what I want to practice, is tenderness. So often, when we think of Lent, we almost, practice kind of a boot camp Christianity, that it's a time to toughen ourselves up, or it's a time for hard disciplines. And there's a place for all of that, in our lives and in our spirituality. Many times going to prayer is simply a hard discipline. We don't want to do it. We're not naturally drawn there, but we've just got to practice it so that it becomes a habit. On those days I don't feel like praying, I should still pray, right? Get myself into a chair and pray, because it's a good habit to practice and to develop. However, especially Lent 2021, where many of us are simply worn out. Someone said to me, we've kind of been in Lent for the last year when it comes to, kind of hard practices and disciplines and fasting from things. And there are people who are suffering greatly. People who are suffering greatly don't need to add more suffering in order to move toward holiness. But rather, the way to holiness, and holiness meaning, living out of a relationship with the Lord, it would seem to be to open oneself to the tenderness, to the consolation, to the peace, to the presence, to the companionship that only God can offer us, that only Jesus can give us. So, as I thought of this even, and Boyle talks about this, on Ash Wednesday, not only were there people here for Mass, which is, as you know, new for us in reopening for Mass, limited attendance and all that, and COVID protocols. But we also, our scholars are back in the classroom. They were not together with us in church because of needing to distance and all of that. We just don't have that kind of space for all of our students. And so after Mass, we distributed ashes in the classrooms to each of our students, each of our scholars. And it was both to see parishioners here for Mass and to see the children was just so wonderful. It was just a balm. It's kind of like you're here. You're here. And coincidentally, I was again watching Greg Boyle on a YouTube video or something, and he said that's kind of, in telling a story about his mother saying that to her children, as she was dying, and her 8 kids would show up. She said, "Oh, you're here." It's kind of what God does for us, or the delight that Jesus has in us, the joy that God has when we show up and he finds us, and it's like, you're here, that motherly, parental kind of delight in having the kids around, or the grandkids, And that's kind of how I felt. Kind of moves me. It's kind of how I felt in seeing the children and seeing people at Mass. It's like, you're here. That's even and so the gospel this Sunday is Jesus in the desert, and the temptations he faced, but just kind of alone there with God, and God says to Jesus, "You're here, you're here." Says the gospel says that angels ministered to him, that outreach of God's tenderness and God's presence and God's compassion. So, when I don't have a script, I never know quite when to shut up. That's always the problem with people not writing things down, like for eulogies, etc. So I'm going to stop here with that, but offering that as kind of a beginning reflection as we move toward Lent. I would just propose to you that the practice of extravagant tenderness in all of its dimensions is something to consider. Not a Lenten boot camp, but something other to deepen that relationship with the God who loves us. Thanks for tuning in. A blessed Lent, a blessed